Hi students, welcome to our week 6 highlights video. So let's jump right in. So for this week you've finished reading the checklist manifesto. So I wanted to start with one quote from a previous chapter. So checklists seem to provide protection against such failures. They remind us of the minimum necessary steps and make them explicit. I think this is sort of a effective mantra about why checklists are so crucial. And indeed, when usability testing certain products and procedures, in effect, you are making sure that they work safely for the target population of users. And in a similar fashion, checklists ask individuals with expertise or who are perhaps not as expert to go back through a process, to be accountable to the process, to make sure that it's safe for the particular target population that it is addressing. So many examples are shared across the book's nine chapters, and I want you to think about, while these are often discussions of scenarios in which failure occurred or failure was averted because of the use of a checklist, I want you to think about how a usability testing protocol can in fact help a product that might in fact fail being released to market and causing pain, distress, or frustration in a user base. So there are examples in this book from many fields, including surgery, investing, aviation, and disaster relief. So many famous incidents are noted, such as Walmart's immediate responsiveness in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina and Captain Sullenberger and co-pilot Skiles' teamwork to land a U.S. airplane in the Hudson River after striking a flock of geese. So these two incidences were successful in a context where other interventions or lack of interventions were not successful or could have been disastrous. So in the Hurricane Katrina scenario, the Walmart responsiveness is contrasted with FEMA's very centralized decision-making process, which was not successful. And in the U.S. Air success story of the captain and the co-pilot gliding a plane safely down into the Hudson River, that is contrasted in Gawande's book with scenarios in which pilots and crews weren't able to save a plane from disaster. So key concepts in the chapters that you read in the second half of the book were these: empowering people who are not central authorities with power to make immediate decisions. Sometimes administrative bloat and a strict hierarchy prevents people who are more agile because they exist on the ground or in the community from making decisions that might, in the case of Hurricane Katrina, ease suffering and save lives. Another important concept from these chapters is how crucial it is to study failure. So in the aviation industry, failures are very regularly investigated, and we hear about them on the news, and we know that the National Highway Safety Transportation Board, or whatever it's called, I can't remember the acronym, they are charged with investigating failures, catastrophic ones and more minor ones as well. But in many industries, failures aren't studied with quite the same level of attentiveness. And Gawande thinks that that's a big mistake. So also he mentions how understanding local and site-specific variances to what might seem monolithic scenarios or checklists is crucial. When he mentions developing the safe surgery protocols, the checklists that I will discuss in the next slide, he mentions that they were tested in 8 different nations with very different religious, economic, and even sociocultural concerns or realities. So that had an impact on certain things that someone writing from a certain context wouldn't know if it weren't tested in a particular setting in which it was going to be used. So that is very relevant for usability testing with diverse populations, if indeed diverse populations are going to be using a product or a service. So a few questions that I have for you are these. So how do practices of integrating checklisting strategies rely on good communication? It's really interesting. If you look at some of the examples in the back of the checklist manifesto, you'll see that there are explicit notes made concerning how a checklist should be written. It should be written to be read. It should be written in a certain kind of font. It should be written relying not too heavily on color. So it's really interesting that those design and rhetorical communication approaches are expressly articulated in this book. So I want you to think about the ways that checklists are used in Gawande's book, in the operating room, in the cockpit, among construction site workers. So what are the roles of written communication and verbal communication in these contexts? So yes, a checklist, the ones that he describes, are written, but they're meant to be implemented verbally. Of course, this isn't always the case for checklists, but the examples that he gives do rely on the orality of their delivery. So what is Gawande's experience with testing checklists? And this harkens back to my previous slide. So most specifically, the safe surgery checklist for the World Health Organization that he discusses. So he tests it very carefully so he can go back and revise. So now think about this. Is an instruction set a checklist? I want you to think really carefully about that. There's actually a little note on the bottom of one of the examples that makes a point about how checklists are not supposed to be used for instructional or teaching purposes or scenarios. And I wanted you to think about why that is. So also, there's two different kinds of checklists that he mentions, among others, but two that he mentions sort of in the middle of the book are do confirm and read confirm formats. So make sure that you understand the difference between those two different kinds of checklists. So the last thing I want to say about this book is that I hope that you found it very readable and very interesting, and that you can see the interconnectedness of the content in this book to the specific work that we're doing with usability testing and user-centered design in this class. So let's jump quickly to the last slide I have for you today, which concerns chapter 12 of the Handbook of Usability Testing. So I'm only going to focus on this chapter today, though you read 2 other chapters for this week. So you're currently working on a project that asks you to create a template for a usability report. So chapter 12 supports that work that you're doing. So remember, above all, your usability report must be usable, right? So as Ruben says, you may not want to add too many frills or too much beautiful and poetic writing, because those might distract from the overall goal of the report. So not every reader of your usability report, your testing report, is going to be reading it in the same way. Of course, there are many members of teams. So some members of the team will read it for different content than other members of a team. So you need to make sure that it is most usable for the most members of a team who are responsible for making changes to the output. So in the chapter, Ruben explains that the test plan does double duty as the what? Go back in the chapter and look and see what part of the usability testing report aligns with the test plan. And how might you state recommendations in a solutions-oriented fashion to best serve the most people? Of course, the upshot of creating a usability testing report is to recommend changes, right? To an app, to a website, to a service, to a piece of documentation. So you are making recommendations. And so how do you make them in such a way that a solution is what is arrived upon in the next iteration? Of the product's design or the website's design or the app's design. So think about these things. I'm sure you're all hard at work on your usability testing report template. So please reach out to me if you have any questions about that. And I hope you've enjoyed this week's video.